Hello and welcome to Open Mind UFO Radio. I'm your host, Alejandro Rojas, and I am here with Martin Powerless Willis. And this isn't a dig on you that you're some kind of weakling. It's just that you are literally out of power.
That's right. I drove as a dedicated news guy. I drove down to Massachusetts to get electricity to do this show
A different
today.
state.
A different state, yes. I live in Maine, on top of a mountain, and they're saying we had these weird storms come through, and they're saying up to a week to get power restored where I live.
Wow, that's amazing. And how bad were the storms? Like snowstorms?
Trees down. No snow, thank goodness. No, I have trees down. There were trees down in the neighbor's yard and all across the road everywhere. A lot of people weren't able to get out, but I heard chainsaws early this morning. They were cutting trees in the middle of the road that fell down on my road.
Wow. So wind?
So high winds, really high winds. Two storms converged.
Oh my gosh.
60 mile an hour winds. And so we're not used to that type of wind, and trees fall around. And power is out over 1 million people.
Mm-hmm. Has anybody tried to claim it's UFO related?
I think so.
Really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is UFO related because they did a flyby, and that's when it all began.
They tried to stop the show, but little did they know that you have much more resilience than they ever counted on.
That's right. My show is in jeopardy. We'll see what happens by Wednesday.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, they don't care so much about your show because your show wasn't in the Newsweek magazine.
That's true. That's true.
Just kidding. Your shows are great. In fact, you had that Ariel girl. We already talked about that, but that's so amazing. Yeah. That was a great show. So anyway, I guess we should talk about my show. I'm sorry that we're not going to spend more time on your show. It is a great show. It's called UFO Podcast, and I hope you're able to pull it off. I'm sure you'll figure out a way. You're not going to be doing anything else.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely.
So you're going to have a lot of time on your hands.
I'm going to be by candlelight only.
Wow,
yes.
That's amazing. So that reminds me of a story I wrote, just on a little side note. Bill Burns, the guy that was on UFO Hunters, wrote a new book about Edison and Tesla.
Right.
And how they were competing to make this ghost radio type of thing. And so he sent me a preview copy, and I did write a Huffington Post article on that. So people can check that out. It is really interesting, perfect for the Halloween season to freak you out. But yeah, at first Edison was a real skeptic about this whole trend of trying to speak to the dead. That was big in the 1920s, but he was convinced by a guy that worked with him, and he actually did try to create some sort of like a device that could detect ghosts, which is essentially what he was doing. And it was partially business. He was thinking, hey, this thing will sell. So according to Bill's book. So yeah, people can check his book out. And if you want to read my story on it, you could do that from my Facebook. But getting back to UFOs, my guest today is Debbie Ziegelmeyer. She is the state director in Missouri. We've had her on the show 2 or 3 times before. I've been working with her for probably decades now. She's just a great, great lady. I mean, one of those hard workers out there. She's now on the MUFON business board, which kind of steers the way MUFON works. We'll talk about that. She's started the MUFON dive team. I don't know that they've actually had any cases where they've gone underwater to dive, but she's a diver.
Wow.
But really cool cases that we're going to be talking about today. And she is part of the 37th Parallel book and movie that we talked to Chuck Zukowski about, this Ben Mesrick book. I think you had Ben Mesrick on your show, right?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No, not that I'm aware of. I know that it sounds funny, not that I'm aware of, but every once in a while I'll forget a guest's name. So it's kind of embarrassing.
Yeah, I could swear that you did have him on your show. He's the author of the book. I haven't had him on mine because I've had Chuck and Debbie on mine, and they're the actual subject of the book. But yeah, that's going to hopefully get turned into a movie. So we'll be talking about some of her great cases in just a few moments here. However, before that, Martin has driven all the way to Massachusetts to be able to bring us some UFO news. And so hopefully it's something decent, so it's worth your effort.
Well, I hope so. Well, I am going to definitely listen to this show because
it's a good one.
I am fascinated by underwater stuff.
Yeah, we didn't talk about underwater.
And ghost rockets, I don't know if you even mentioned that case, those cases at all.
We don't talk about underwater or ghost rockets in this interview.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's still a good one, though.
There goes that.
It's a possible alleged landing case. That sounds very credible. And then a little girl, an abduction case related to this little girl. And both of these cases are pretty fascinating.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, I am going to talk about a UFO photographed with a cell phone by an airline passenger.
Oh, yeah.
And these are great pictures. Now, this happened, I think it was October 24th, so just the other day. And this person was on a flight from Toronto to Edmonton, and he spotted a strange bright object appearing to be about at the same altitude. So he had one of those Galaxy S8 Pluses, and in which take actually great pictures. I've had one before. So he took a whole bunch of these pictures of, first glance, it looks like, well, it might be a plane or whatever. But then when it zoomed in a little bit, it's almost like a triangular type form. I don't know. I'll see what you think about it. But anyway, it headed off to the east. He had it in sight for a while. And I would be really curious if he thought that it flew off at a high rate of speed, or it doesn't really say much about that. But it's an interesting case. He did take a bunch of pictures, and you can see links to, I think, 4 or 5 other pictures. So you can check that out on openminds.tv.
Yeah, the pictures are intriguing. Photos from aircraft are always fun. Typically, what's funny is I would gather, and, having done this so much, most of the photos we get from airplanes are things that are on the window of the airplane, and people notice them afterwards, it seems. This one, not so. This is a good picture. There's obviously something out there above the clouds. Someone had said they felt it was a plane. In fact, Peggy, I think, who runs your Facebook, said she could make out some words on the side of a plane.
Wow.
I can't see that at all. Of course, it could be a plane because it does seem like an object. This person said it was, kind of pacing them, and then the way they put it is that it disappeared to the east, so they didn't mention it like zooming or flying off. Hopefully, we'll get more if MUFON is able to speak with this witness and do an investigation. But it's a fascinating picture.
Yeah, and they could easily, if they had the time correct, the timestamp of when he took these pictures, which he probably does on his phone, they should be able to check traffic.
Yeah, right.
In the area to see what's going on.
Yeah, so we'll see what the investigation bears, but there's definitely something there. It's not immediately obvious that it is an aircraft, but we'll see. It's an interesting one that is not solved yet. And that reminds me, one of the interesting UFO sighting reports that we've talked about not too long ago, it was September 29th when I posted the story, was that red blob. You remember that one?
Oh, yes.
Over Louisiana. Mm-hmm. And no one has really come up with an answer yet.
Wow.
Someone said it might be an aurora. People have had a few kind of suggestions, but nothing really that strong. Just possible small aurora is all I've heard. I actually reached out to James Oberg, who's a science writer for MSNBC, very popular science writer, used to work for NASA, and he actually reads our site quite often, but I haven't heard back from him, and I haven't heard back from Mark D'Antonio too, so that one has not been resolved either, and I'm so curious about that one because that's a good one too.
Yeah, and it's very possible it is a natural phenomenon. It's just trying to figure out what the heck it would be.
Yeah, which it could be because it looks kind of like, space photos or like sprites or those different types of things you see up there. Of course, sprites are related to clouds, so it's not
like lightning.
Right?
It's lightning going up, right?
Or it's kind of lightning going up is kind of a good way to describe that. But yeah, so it's very strange. It's a really cool photo. So that one has not been resolved either. So yeah, another thing you wanted to talk about. We talked about before the show is that this group, the Scientific Coalition for Ufology, is finally kind of announced. So we've talked about this group before in relation to the Agua Dia, Puerto Rico Homeland Security video, because this group was put together kind of ad hoc to investigate that. Most of them were with MUFON, but the witness didn't want their name to be known. They wanted to remain anonymous, and they were a little worried about working with a big group like MUFON, so they wanted it to be kind of a smaller investigation. So these guys got together, investigated. They did that for 2 years, wrote a 161-page report that's been controversial, at least online. And although a lot of credible organizations like NICAP or there's a French organization have come out in support of their research, saying that they feel similar, that it's unidentified. So this group is started. So what they've done is they've decided to expand and to get more science-minded researchers involved to focus on the science of UFO research and to investigate cases, from that perspective. So that's what they're doing. That's what they're focusing on, which is really cool. I am a part of this group. A couple others are like Lee Spiegel. I brought him on, and Bryce Zabel to kind of help me because I help get news out for them, kind of press releases and stuff like that. But Robert Powell's a part of this group. Rich Hoffman. I don't know if these guys are a couple of guys you've talked to. Morgan Bial. Yes. Yeah, they're all part of that. They've been there since the beginning. They were part of the Agua Dia thing. But
so are you saying, pardon me, are you saying that the military part of the team, former military, they do not want to be identified, or are they going to be?
That's a good question, because I don't think they've determined, if they're going to tell everybody who their membership are. Out of the membership, there are, let me look this up, because this is an interesting factoid. There are 19 in the group. Well, actually, there's a couple more now. But out of those original 19, there are 3 PhDs, 1 person working on their PhD, 3 with master's degrees, 10 with bachelor's degrees, 2 with law enforcement background, and 11 of the 19 either have direct military experience or work in fields directly tied to the military, meaning like aerospace and stuff like that. So, a lot of very credible people that are part of this group, and there is a public Facebook page. There probably won't be any report out anytime soon but they are working on some cases. But anything that they say, will be very well thought out and well researched. Really, the only Robert Powell, who's part of the group, has been writing about this USS Nimitz case, which I had him on my show to talk about, and he actually will be posting those at Open Minds this week. So if you want to know more about that case, that's not an SEU case per se at this point, but it is at least his own little investigation there. So that will be good. So, yeah. So that's kind of what's going on.
What are they hoping to accomplish? Just a real scientific look at...
Yeah, so just like their Aguadilla case that, they hope to essentially do what others have sought to do, is have peer review reports. So what they want to do is, have people either submit investigations, or people within the group will be doing investigations. They want them to be seriously, thought out and well-researched investigations. Then when someone has done one, they could submit it to the group to ask it to be peer-reviewed. The group will then decide if it warrants that. And if they do decide that, then they'll put together a group of credible scientists and researchers that are mainstream credible. So like the press will be, impressed with the credentials of this group. They will then do like a peer review group does. They'll look at the document, criticize it, and come out with a final report, their report on that. And so it'll kind of bring this all to another level of actually getting some research done and getting some scrutiny on cases, and but also being public friendly in that groups like NICAP, which are great. I'm a huge fan of NICAP, but they haven't released an investigation or a report in quite some time. And even when they did, it was really low key, whereas this group is going to be directly sharing investigations and cases with the public and trying to get the word out there more, and hopefully being taken credible and bringing this thing to the next level. So
now, are they going to be just researching the data, or are they actually going to do boots on the ground? Do you know that?
They definitely are doing boots on the ground. So one of the cases they're working on is this Alabama case, and I think I had Rich Hoffman on my show not too long ago talking about it, where it's kind of like the Hessdalen lights. People are seeing these orbs flying around in Alabama, and so that's one where they're out there kind of doing like Hessdalen, trying to get some equipment to do some more examination. Not only that, some of the people in the group are part of the UFO data group, that group that was announced that Chris Mellon is part of it, the guy who is part of Tom DeLonge's group, who worked for the CIA. But they wanted to try to develop some sort of monitoring system just like Hessdalen, and they have some of the Hessdalen guys as part of their group. But Mark D'Antonio is also part of the SCU, and of course, Mark D'Antonio is MUFON's photo analyst, but he's working with Doug Trumbull, the special effects guru who did like Close Encounters and other things, and they're developing a system of cameras and different telemetry to be able to capture these objects and determine, what they might be using the science as well. So that will also be incorporated. So, yeah, these guys, what's cool about this, too, is a lot of times groups will get created, but they don't do much. And it's not because they don't have good intentions. It's just there's not enough time in the day, they're busy people. But all of these guys are really hardworking, and they're getting stuff done. I mean, they don't like to sit idle. They're working, and they're out there doing stuff. And that's what's fun, because I think we're going to see a lot of good stuff from these guys.
I've been very active in the UFO topic now for, I want to say, 6 years, not very long, compared to you and many others. But in that short amount of time, I've seen a lot of science-based, things come together and involved in searching, for what this phenomena really is, or trying to. And that's really encouraging. It just, instead of it just being a laughable topic, more and more people are looking to investigate, through science, which I think is great.
I agree. I think that's really great, because it's easy to believe, it's difficult to prove. And it's kind of like, so who cares what I believe, really? And that's kind of how I feel. And it's one thing I could talk about what I believe or suspect, but if we can prove it, that's something different. That's a game changer, and that's why so many want to work towards that. And of course, I want to work towards that as a journalist, because if I can prove something incredible, or I can write a story about something incredible being proven, then that's exciting. That changes the story. That changes what we all feel and see about this. And I think that's exciting. So there's been a little bit of coverage. I wrote the press release and sent it out late last week on Friday. And I also posted it at openminds.tv so people can read about the group. And there's been some coverage in UK tabloids, of course. They cover all my stories. But they did a good job with this. Our good old buddy John Austin did a pretty good job with this one, I feel. So, thanks, Mr. Austin. Otherwise, I have heard from space.com. And since I've been doing a lot of science writing and traveling and going to these different events that promote, NASA things and everything, I've got some friends in the industry.
That's great.
And so I've got a friend at Forbes who likes the story too. So she's going to be writing something up that we'll hopefully see in the next few days.
All right. And so just also the website for the SCU is explorescu.org.
Yep.
For anyone that wants to check it out.
Yep.
Yeah.
So another big story out there too, and I wrote about it. I don't remember if I had. I think I had a little bit to add to that story. At least I think, it's not so tongue in cheek like the other stories out there. But it's this woman who's an alleged alien abductee who's running for Congress in Florida. A little bit more information about that and her efforts. She, I guess, is kind of the underdog anyway. Her campaign might have been over before this news even came out, it looks like. And now it's really over, unfortunately, but for better or worse. But she's standing by it, and she seems like a intelligent person. And so I've got some more about her story on openminds.tv too.
Do you think that is at this point in the way things are, that's kind of like a death sentence for a campaign for someone to come out with this?
Well, you know what? Normally in America it is, but things have been changing. And like I write in the story, there is this guy I love to talk about, and, longtime listeners will recognize the name, Kirsan Ilyumzhanov. I've mentioned him in talks before. He's a friend of Putin's, and he was a president of Kalmykia, a part of the Russian Federation for a while, and he had said he had an abduction experience that is not so much different than hers. So I write about, hey, this is an example of a guy where it didn't have any impact on his political career, but that's of course in Russia. But things have been getting weird around here, and things have been changing. So you never know.
But wasn't he solidly seated when he came out with that?
He was, pretty much. Yeah, you're right. He was. But there have been opportunities for opponents to use this against him, and it hasn't worked.
Wow.
Not only political opponents, but Garry Kasparov, a famous chess player, probably the most famous, tried to unseat Kirsan from his role as president of the International Chess Federation. And him leaking some stuff about his abduction had no effect on that either. So Kirsan he's under dispute right now. He's being attacked because he's got some shady business dealings he's been getting in trouble with. But he is still technically the president of that group. So, yeah.
Well, it was probably the aliens' fault that got him in trouble.
Maybe.
Could be. Yeah.
Yep.
I would, they caused the weather problem here, so you never know what they're going to do.
You never know, those tricky little sons.
Muggers.
All right, well, we are out of time. Thank you so much for bringing us some UFO news, Martin, even though you're kind of homeless at this point.
I am, aren't I? Yes. Yeah. You're very welcome, sir.
All right, well, I hope everything goes well for you. And
thank you.
We'll be right back after a short break. If you're listening on KGRA, you'll hear some commercials. Otherwise, if you're listening to the podcast, we'll have a short music interlude and be right back. Welcome back to the show. You're listening to Open Minds UFO Radio. I am your host, Alejandro Rojas, and we have joining us once again, Debbie Ziegelmeyer. Hello.
Hi, Alejandro. Thank you so much for having me.
It's wonderful to have you back. We had your brother, Chuck Zukowski, on not too long ago, and between the two of you, you guys have been on the show quite a bit, but you're always a lot of fun to talk to. I love you guys, so I'm happy to have you back.
Thank you. We have very interesting lives, and I don't realize it until we start talking about what we do, and people say, what? So,
yeah, you guys are weird.
A little bit, yeah.
So, we were both in Wyoming together, which was a lot of fun at the Devil's Tower UFO event, and you had a great presentation. I unfortunately had to leave for maybe even almost half of it in the middle, and then I was able to come back and catch the end, but it was a really fascinating.
Oh, well, thank you. I chose cases that I had worked on in Missouri that were close encounters, and I thought it was important to do real-life close encounters because a lot of people that have seen the movie don't realize how close this is to actual events. You know, the way that the characters acted and how it affected their lives, and that there actually are real-life close encounter cases in the past, the future, and I'm sure in the present, but this is actually going on. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit scary and also very interesting.
Yeah. Oh, on that note, I guess, when you first started getting into this, and we've probably talked about this, but I guess, were you frightened by the whole idea?
No.
Really?
I probably should have been, but I wasn't. It just seemed, the more I got into the cases and the more interesting it was, just the more intrigued. I think it's kind of like a police detective. Mm-hmm. You know, you can get into a case, and then the more you find out what's going on, and the more you want to know, and the more deeper your investigation goes, and you don't really think about anything but gathering the information and talking to the witnesses, and then later on you think, wow, that was pretty intense. So, no, nothing. It's kind of funny. We were talking about that the other day, my husband and I, and about what scares people. And I think I came to the conclusion that the only thing that scares me is a bear. If I saw
really?
That's it. I mean, I don't snakes, nothing else. But I think if I met a giant bear in the woods, that would frighten me.
That's funny. But an alien or a Bigfoot, you'd be okay.
I would be okay.
That's so funny. Well, that's cool. You're brave. And what's interesting, you know, since I think the last time you were on the show, I've had a lot more interaction with your sisters who have, we were both in Roswell as well, and your sisters were there. They were at the MUFON Symposium. You and Chuck were you were at the MUFON Symposium, of course, because you're
yes.
Part of the board of directors, and your sisters were there also. So
I spoke. I was speaking. I'm sorry. I spoke at the MUFON Symposium. I was the last speaker.
That's right. So what's that been like to have now not only your brother-in-law involved, who you've worked really closely with, but now your sisters?
I guess it's brought us a little bit closer. My sisters both live in California. I don't talk to them a lot. We all live in different. Well, my sister's in California, Chuck in Colorado, and I'm here in Missouri. And the best part about all of this is that we're getting together a lot more. There times would go by where there'd be 2 years where I wouldn't see some of them. And Chuck and I see each other 2-3 times a year. And now with my sisters involved in MUFON, we're meeting at MUFON events, and it's kind of cool. We're reconnecting after years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's got to be kind of fun, and it is funny to see you guys interact because you definitely have the sibling stuff where you guys get on and tease each other and all of that, and it's a lot of fun. For us, maybe not so much for you guys.
No, it's all good.
So, also, the book, I mean, the 39th, or is it 39th? 37th parallel. I got the parallel wrong. The 37th parallel book seems to have done very well. And, of course, that was work based on investigations that you and your brother had done. And now it's going to be getting turned into a movie. Your brother was telling us about that a few weeks ago.
Right. It was kind of funny how it started out. It started out just with him being on a TV episode about his cattle mutilation investigations, and then someone picked that up and had him on a 1-hour special about the 37th parallel, which they had seen a blog on his website. And then from there, some producers said, "Oh, this would be a great movie or TV show." They commissioned Ben Mesrich to write a book, and I didn't realize the process. You start with a book, and then after the book comes out, then there's screenplays, and then they have 3 screenplay writers, and then after they pick one of those, then they start in with the scripts. It's a long process, but it's very interesting. It's been a couple years, and hopefully there'll be a full-length feature out by the end of 2018. We're hoping. They've already picked a few actors. Well, possibly. Robert Downey Jr. has been interested in this since day one, and at first he wanted to play my brother Chuck, and I think now they're looking more toward he may end up directing or playing Bigelow, or I'm not sure, but I know he's going to be involved if he possibly can, or if they can afford him in some fashion. He apparently keeps up with Chuck's website weekly.
Oh, wow. That is interesting, and you just leaked something there that Bigelow's going to be represented in the movie.
Well, Bigelow's in the book.
Yeah.
Bigelow was toward the very beginning. They made reference to Bigelow and some of the investigations, and so I don't know if I really leaked anything or not. If you've read the book, it's going to follow pretty close. And what they told us was they were going to use our real names, which is kind of cool. I hope this time they get mine right, because they've got me first as Chuck's sister, and then they've got me listed in I don't know. It's back toward the end on my Scam in Kansas investigation, and I'm listed as in there as Chuck as Debbie Zukowski.
Oh, no.
I know. So they haven't got my last name right. That's my maiden name, of course, but they're going to use our real names. It's going to be interesting. They said it's a whole lot harder to write a screenplay for this book than for some other things that this gentleman had other projects he'd done. I guess because he's trying to stay true to life, but our true to life is pretty unusual.
Yeah, right. That sounds fun. So who do you hope they get to play you?
I have
you thought
no
about
idea.
it?
I think they're going to go back a few years, and they're going to find people that go back to where maybe Chuck and I were in our 40s. So it would be naturally somebody that age group, somebody the same age as maybe like Matt Damon, who's also somebody who's they're looking at to play Chuck. Somebody that would play good against Matt Damon. I don't know.
Hopefully they get someone with curly hair.
Well, yeah, depending. That I guess there's not a lot of actresses out there with hair as big as mine, except for Melissa McCarthy, and I don't think she would be a good fit.
Ooh, you never know. That would be great. So that's exciting. But in Wyoming, like I was talking about, that was a great talk. And I think I missed your talk at MUFON. Was it similar to your talk in Wyoming?
No, my talk in MUFON was a case for underground. Let's see, a case for underwater alien bases.
Okay.
So it was total different direction.
Well, this is a great talk. Mostly you and your brother kind of do this tag team thing, but I really liked you doing your own thing because these were your cases you investigated, not that the others weren't, but at least you get to kind of express kind of your experience with these cases, but also it flows well, you know. You get to, you know, it's different when people have a presentation that is more scripted where they're following notes and kind of trying to hit cues. You can tell, and it can sometimes be a little choppy, but when, like with you, someone who's just got a lot of experience and knowledge is kind of using some notes, but, you know, off the cuff, it's just flowing out of you because this is stuff that you know and you live with. It comes across so well, and these were really fascinating cases. So I just thought you did a magnificent job.
Oh, thank you. I only use notes because the cases are a few years old.
Yeah.
And
no, notes are important.
I lived them along with these witnesses. You get to know the witnesses pretty well. The interesting thing is that we're working on some cases right now that are also abduction, close encounter, but they're still ongoing, so it's something I'm not really able to discuss yet. And not only because I don't have all the facts, but because there's so much more coming in that there isn't really an ending to it. And with any of these, I really don't think there's an ending. There's just a stopping point. But with a lot of these people, this continues. And there's, well, probably the first case I'm going to talk about was the people that bought this property and intended to build a life there. And it didn't work out that way because of what happened. So this type of thing really affects people on in a deep, deep level.
Intriguing. So now you got to do a little foreshadowing into what we'll be talking about. But yeah, let's tackle a couple of these great cases that you covered. And this first one is a sightings case, right? So maybe you could start us off with how you came in contact with these people. I'm sure it was a MUFON case, and how the investigation started and where it went.
Well, it was a MUFON Star Team case, and Star Team is basically a case that's given to investigators who are experienced. They have their own equipment. They're able to grab their equipment and run maybe in a moment's notice. But that's really the only difference between a Star Team case and a regular investigated case. And this was case 20143, and it was in Versailles, Missouri, October 25th of 2009. And just because you already mentioned the 37th parallel, this was at 38.25. Now, 37th parallel is the center part of the paranormal highway, but it extends into 38 and, of course, down to 36. So this case was out really in the middle of nowhere, some private land, not too far from Lake of the Ozarks. And the witness and his wife had gone to bed, and it was about 1:30 in the morning, and out from his window he saw this flashing light, different color flashing lights. Well, when you live in a large piece of property, you own a large piece of property, and the woods are in your background, and you see flashing red and different colors at night, your first thought is, I've got a forest fire going on here. This is something that needs to be paid attention to. So he jumped up, went outside, and he said, well, there's something back there. And he tried to get his wife to go out and take a look, and she was settled in for the night. And he also had a 17-year-old son who was still up playing video games, but his 11-year-old son was asleep. So he went outside, this gentleman, Gary, went outside and was looking at this object, and he couldn't believe no one else wanted to see it. So he naturally got up, got his 11-year-old son up and said, you got to come see this with me. And that's when he went back in and had to grab binoculars. So he and the boy went outside with binoculars to get a closer look. And they were looking off into the woods, which we realized later was about a quarter of a mile straight back. There was an upright triangle-shaped craft, and it was all these different multicolored lights of silver, green, blue, orange, red. And they were all flashing, And he said that much lower in the woods, there were 3 kind of saucer-shaped orange and red lights that were in a field. And then he looked over to another field and, the opposite side of this craft, and there were 3 more lights. And then a little bit farther to the left, there was another little light, and they were all kind of spinning, and they were really bright. And he said he could see them without the binoculars, but when he looked at them closely with the binoculars, he said they didn't really have any shape, but the one triangle-shaped object did. And then he said after about an hour, these lights just kind of changed to round shape, and then they just kind of disappeared. When they thought, well, they stayed out there for a while. They're out there for an hour, and they thought, well, maybe they should walk through the woods, and they were getting ready to maybe just go on in the house, and which is kind of surprising. You see something like this, and eventually, by now it's 2:30 in the morning, and people just get tired, and they say, well, we're going to go on in, go in the house. I don't know what it is, but it's too far in the woods to go and look at. But just then, this deer came running by, snorting. Something had scared it, and it ran just right at the wood line, right across the path in front of them. And so they thought, whoa, something has spooked spooked this deer. So he and his son looked, and he started looking through his binoculars, and he said at about 50 yards away behind his house, there was a being, some kind of a being is how he described it, was 5 feet tall, was standing there. And this little being had clothing that was horizontally striped, that was black and white, and he said loose fit, kind of like a down jacket. And he was holding an object in his left hand, talking into it, and he had a backpack-like object at his feet. And he said, so he had the binoculars focused outward to see this object that was out in the woods, so he was focusing in, looking closer to see if he could get a good look at what it was that was standing there. And as he focused in, he noticed that this creature had a white face and white hands. I mean, just white looking face and hands. And it startled him. So he turned around. He told his son, "Run!" And he turned around, and wow. This little guy was already halfway back to the house. So he took off running too, and they went into the house, and they would look out periodically and go back in, and periodically and go back in, and finally they fell asleep, and when they woke up at 5:30 in the morning and the sun was starting to come up, they didn't see anything anymore. So I went out there in the investigation, and Margie Kay, our assistant state director, stayed behind, and she was interviewing his wife and his 2 sons and having them draw kind of what they saw. And she had already had this gentleman, Gary, draw what he had seen. We always separate everybody and have them describe what they see and draw it the best they can. And he and I walked out. He had a dog named Sophie, and I always like to take a dog with us if they have a dog that's comfortable, that follows them around. What I go back to is what I learned about Roswell. I investigated Roswell. I've been investigating Roswell for 20 years, and one of the most important things about that was that for 2-3 years later, the skip site where the debris was picked up, where there were alien bodies found, no animals would go across there. Animals were sensing something. They would have to take the sheep around this quarter-mile area. I spoke to witnesses who said there were no jackrabbits, there were no snakes, there were no bugs, no birds, nothing would go in there. So animals have a really good sense about an area. So we thought, okay, well, we're going to take Sophie along with us. So Gary and I decided to walk out and see if we could find a landing site. And as we got to the area where he thought the being was, we looked over, and Sophie just stopped and just growled a little bit and then started backing up. And I ran a Geiger counter across there. I didn't find anything, but Sophie made a great big circle around and caught us later on farther in the woods and wouldn't go across that. So we walked across woods and over fences and under fences and across a creek, and we got about, I guess it was about a quarter a mile. Actually, I think it was 0.7 miles away into the woods. And Gary looked back, the witness looked back, and he said, well, I can barely see my house at the top of the hill, so I think the vantage point looking down we're probably in the right area. So I started walking a pattern back and forth. It's kind of a scuba diving thing where I walk like an underwater pattern. You go up a few feet and come back down, and back and forth trying to find something.
Now, did you think there's any way some sort of vehicle could have gotten in there, like emergency vehicle or something?
Oh no, not at all. We walked through. I kind of dumb me. There was a fence that was electric. Because there's cows there, and I said, well, I touched it a little bit, and I said, okay, this isn't live, so we picked that up and went across it. I thought it's not going to be a big shock or kill anybody. It's not meant to injure the cows, just distract them. But we had to lift up that kind of a fence. He and I pulled up barbed wire and got in between. So he would pull it apart for me, and then I would pull it apart for him to get through. We'd put our bags through the fence first. We walked across the creek. So no, there was no way. It was thick with leaves. There were no track marks. So nothing could have made its way. We were going down a hill, down and up and down and up. It was a lot of trees and deep woods. So nothing could have got back there. We got to the area in question, and then I saw this one section. Now, there were really thick leaves all across there, and there was this one section that they were just moved. I measured it, and it was 6 foot by 6.5 foot. And I looked around to see where Sophie was, and she was gone. She was way off in the distance, just looking. I started looking around, and there were broken trees way at the top. There were a couple trees that were down. There were tree limbs at the top of these tall trees that were broken. And the weird thing about the site was that the ground, it was a square area with thick brush and thick leaves around it, except for the trees that were down, and the ground was sucked up. It was almost like someone had taken a suction cup and just or maybe like a toilet plunger, and just pushed and sucked. The ground was puffy to where it was even with the thick leaves, but the leaves were moved off of it. The grass was pulled out to where there were just holes where the grass used to be. There was one section where it was, the far end, it was bumped up. So it was unusual, to say the least, just an unusual area. This was just, I believe it was 2 days after the landing is when we made our way there. I took some pictures of that, and I'm looking at my notes here. It was 6 foot 6 inches by 7 foot 6 inches, exact rectangle. So I took some readings. I had a Geiger counter, ran the Geiger counter across, and didn't catch anything. I had an old civil defense Geiger counter. I have a better one now because I always take a compass with me, and it was showing a false north. Now I had a compass the whole way so we wouldn't get lost. I'm not really good with GPS and stuff, so I always have just a regular old hand compass. And I compassed our way there and thought I'd compass my way back. It's kind of the diver in me with my compass. But it was showing a false north, and I thought, I really need to get a better Geiger counter before my hair falls out. I went a little bit farther and found 2 other little landing sites possible. They were 75 feet from the primary site. There were 2 holes that were side by side, and they were a foot 6 inches apart, 10 inches deep. And I know I'm not real bright sometimes when it comes to this. I'm more curious. I didn't have gloves or anything, but I put my hand down the hole. There might have been a creature down there, but I noticed that it wasn't rounded at the bottom. It was kind of narrow and kind of, like an angle at the bottom. At the top of these were 1 foot 4 inches, each one of them. So round. So we didn't find a third one, just 2. We walked around the area a little bit, and we found the field where the balls of light were moving around. I didn't find any readings there. And then he and I got lost in the woods. We went kind of too far finding these fields, and we made our way back. We called Margie Kay, and she was at the house. She came and got us. And as we're going back, he said, "Oh, well, that's my neighbor, Denny. He lives his house is 10 acres from my house, from his house. And he's a retired Marine Air wingman for 7 years." He said the next evening, 2 military helicopters were circling the area about 11, and he said they were 4 F-11 jets. He assumed from.
Wow. Actually, I've got to cut you off here,
Thanks.
but this is good because this is a cliffhanger. Because this
Okay.
is really interesting. But we're going to take a short break here, and then we'll come back. You're listening to Open Minds UFO Radio. If you're listening on KGRA, you'll hear a short commercial break. So do listen in and patronize these great people who are supporting KGRA. If you're listening to the podcast, you'll hear a little bit of music, and I'll be right back with Debbie Ziegelmeyer. Welcome back to Open Mind UFO Radio. I'm your host, Alejandro Rojas, and we are here with Debbie Ziegelmeyer. She's telling us about a great case of this possible landing in the forest. And you were just talking about how the neighbor, he was a Marine, I think you say, and he saw some military activity after the landing.
Right. It was the next night, and he was a Marine air wingman for 7 years. It was the very next night at 10:30 at night. He said there were 2 military helicopters circling, and then at a little while later, half an hour later, 4 F-11 jets from Whiteman Air Force Base were, he said, traveling at 80 knots, and they were running a crisscross staggering grid. So he told us a little about this. He said he was outside because he was having a smoke and watching for his wife who got home late. Well, Margie and I made our way back. Margie Kay, our assistant state director, made our way back. We set up some cameras because the witness said that there had been a light the night before in that area. We got a picture. Margie got 2 pictures of this light before her camera went dead. I was trying to figure out what it was with Starry Night, and my computer went dead. I got just a little bit of video of it. And then there's interference on my camera, which is a little 8mm tape. I have a Handycam, Sony Handycam that took the tapes, and I got a little bit of the light, and then it went out. So I lost my camera. I plugged in. We got a little bit more of it later on than that, but we know that it was stationary. We'd move back and forth behind the trees. We had helicopters surrounding us. There was a helicopter just going around us, and eventually the light moved off and we didn't see it anymore. So about 11:30 at night, Margie and I decided to wrap things up and head back home because we each had a 4-hour drive home. But that's how it ended. That was kind of how it ended. There was still something there. The sad part was that I kept up with this gentleman for about 2 years. He was having sightings in this area, and eventually he didn't answer his phone anymore. I got a hold of the neighbor who said that just they up and moved. That now they had bought this property, had a mobile home there, were going to build a home, build a life with their children. And what happened there unnerved them so badly, they packed up and they left, and I don't know where they went, but this is how that affected their life.
How strange, and it's funny because when you tell the story, and especially with you and with your brother, we would do these investigations. So I remember what it's like, and it's funny to be on this side because I'll ask the question, but do you get the impression at all, or what were these people like? What was the witness like? And is there any chance they were trying to trick you? Because if they were, that would have to be some sort of coordinated effort.
No. The wife had no interest at all in the sighting. The teenage son really had no interest in the sighting. What we had was an 11-year-old boy who was as honest as he could be about this. I mean, this is what this child saw. The dad was a very nice, sincere person. I believe he was an auto mechanic. These are just good country people that have an experience. Good Christian country people have this experience, and it affects their lives. They don't know what to do. They call MUFON. Sometimes it's because they want to know what they saw. They want us to tell them what they saw, and unfortunately we can't. We can only say, we have seen things like this before, but at this point we don't know what it is. All we can do is speculate. They want some kind of closure, I guess is what it is. Mm-hmm. And it eventually it plays on them. You know, he kept looking out the same area where the being was, and he kept seeing lights, and it gets to the point too where they're seeing things that maybe they aren't unknown anymore, but just everything bothers them, and the best thing a lot of these people can do is just leave and make a fresh start.
That's what's so weird about it, is that when you're out there with these people and you run across a case like this, and, you know, sometimes I talk to some of the old timers, the people who get out in the field. It reminds me of Chase and her story, Chase Kletsky, who's another investigator,
right.
You know, and I remember the feeling, you know, what it's like when you're out in the field with these people and they're telling you about this extraordinary occurrence. You're seeing some things that may support what they said they saw, but you just know these are regular people who experience something extraordinary.
It is. It's truly extraordinary.
So weird. That's a fascinating case. And you know what's funny is this case ends like so many cases do, where you eventually lose touch with the witness, or in really interesting cases, the experience affects their life so much that it causes some sort of disruption. Where in this case, you know, they gave up on their dream to build a home there and they've moved on.
Well, the next one, if I have time to tell you real quick about another one.
Yeah, we've got time. Go for it.
Changed this family's life incredibly. They live in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. They were in Springfield, Missouri. I guess it's about a 5-hour trip. They were there she was there going to the doctor, and they were coming back through the Mountain View area, West Plains area down south. And as they're coming down the highway, down Highway 60, the little girl, Sarah, she says, "Mom, there's something there. There's some kind of a light or something." And her mom's going, "Oh, just go on and play your game." She was playing a video game in the back of the car. And this light came from behind her and came around, and she was like, "Mom, Mom." And it was so cute. We interviewed her. The little girl was 9 years old, and she says, "My mom said, 'Shut up.'" She goes, "Shut up? You're telling me, shut up?" And she said then all of a sudden she couldn't talk. This light was blinding, and she was screaming "Mom" in her mind, but she couldn't get anything vocal. She heard a voice in her mind tell her, "You're okay, everything's going to be fine." Well, they pulled over the side of the road because they thought they thought there was a military maneuver going on. And I had spoke to the Ruth, who was in charge of the parks at the Park Service at the time, and she said, "That's Mark Twain Forest. There's a fire hazard. I'll guarantee you there is nothing going on in my forest. There's no fires. There's no fireworks allowed. There's no ATVs that can be driven. Nothing going on there." Well, the husband and wife described what they saw as some type of a military maneuver with planes going over and things being shot up in the air. But then when she drew a picture for us, she had a triangle-shaped craft, and she had what looked like a helicopter that was towing from beneath it, towing a saucer shape. So she was telling us, the mom, Teresa, was telling us one thing, and she was drawing something else, which was really intriguing.
Wow. I
got a hold of the local newspaper. The editor wouldn't talk to me, but I found the secretary told me that she was coming home from her sister's house after wrapping Christmas presents. This was on December 4th of 2006. And they were wrapping Christmas presents, and she said she saw this balls of light and these flashes and stuff going on from over her shoulder. So I called the local fire department, and they had made no fire runs. I called the local police department, and the police chief, who was 28 years old at the time, Mountain Grove Police Chief, he said he did see something, but he was coming home from work. He had been working Christmas shopping, coming home, and he wanted to catch a show, which was Monday Night Football, apparently. So he made a right-hand turn home, and all this activity was going on. If he'd have made a left, he'd have seen it. But he said, I was off duty. So I have a couple other witnesses that saw the lights. We finally got to where they originally called us because little Sarah was having nightmares. She'd wake up just screaming in the middle of the night, said there were aliens after her. And I visited her several times, took a psychologist finally to speak to her. And what had happened was that we found out later the mom, Teresa, had started to remember some of what had happened. And this took about 2 weeks for her to remember. She started having dreams and memories and flashbacks. They had pulled over on the side of the road, and a craft had come down and landed. And then another craft behind it had landed. The first craft, some beings got out. They walked up and they all got out of the car. The witness, Sarah, the 9-year-old, Teresa, her mom, and then the husband who wished to remain anonymous. They got out of the car and they were watching, well, these alien beings that she described as grays took Sarah, the little girl, by the hands and took her onto the craft. And when they did, they made both the husband and wife give them their shoes. So they took their shoes and their daughter. They waited there. They took their shoes.
And the mom is now remembering this just on her own. Yes,
she started a couple weeks later, started having dreams and flashbacks, and then she said she was just mortified. She says, "Oh my gosh, I let them take my daughter." And I said, "Why would they take your shoes?" And she said, "All I can figure is that maybe they thought we wouldn't leave because we didn't have our shoes." So she said, "We stood there and just let them take our daughter and patiently waited till they brought her back." Well, they ended up with about an hour and a half of missing time. It took them way too long to get home. The little girl was having nightmares that they were trying to take her and her friends at home once she got home. So she was worried about that, but she described what she saw was they took her onto this craft, and it was a very kind of bright place. There were people sitting on these chairs. They put her on a table kind of like at the doctor's office. And she said there was a very mean alien, and he was really tall. She said very, very, very tall. And he was black. He had eyes that had like kaleidoscope eyes. And she was afraid, but she said a little alien came over and said, "You're okay, I'll protect you." And she said the smaller alien, which was more, I guess she described as the gray, was protecting her from the larger one and said she would be okay. Well, they both left the room, and she said, "I took off running." She took off running, and she ran right into the large, tall alien and just stopped. And a couple of the shorter ones took her back into the room and told her to lay down and close her eyes and she would be okay. But the next thing she remembers, she was in the car and she was sleeping. She woke up in the back seat. So this poor little girl was having these nightmares. And I took the psychologist. We decided the best thing to do would to give her a journal and let her write her experiences in the journal, good, bad, homework, whatever. Just write things in the journal and try and get through this. I was calling once a week, and every time I'd call, the nightmares would start up again. So I eventually stopped calling just so she could get on with her life. She ended up being homeschooled for the first year because the little girl couldn't deal with going to school anymore. The husband and wife, the husband couldn't deal with any of this, the whole thing. And I knew that every time I called, I would just make it worse. I'd bring it all back again. Well, they ended up getting a divorce. So this was just like Close Encounters with Roy, and I believe her name was Randy, I believe was the girl's name. They ended up getting a divorce because he couldn't deal with what was going on, and it was kind of in his face all the time. The interesting thing about this was the same time they were going through a divorce, and she would call me up and crying and saying, I just don't know what to do. A couple nights later, my daughter would call up and she would be upset and saying, she was going through a divorce also. My granddaughter was 3 years younger than Sarah, and Teresa and her husband were about the same age as my daughter and then son-in-law. And the most interesting thing about this case, if you think that's not interesting enough, was I won't give the name of the witness husband because he had the same first and last name as my son-in-law that my daughter was divorcing.
At the same time?
At the same time. They were getting a divorce at the same time. They both had the same first and last name. And They don't have the same occupations. My ex-son-in-law, which we still stay in contact with, he's my granddaughter's father, and very nice gentleman. My daughter and him just grew apart. But he's a contractor, and Sarah's daddy was an auto mechanic that worked at an auto dealership in Cape Girardeau. But I just thought this case was meant for me.
Right.
And I would like to try and find Sarah now and find out how she's doing. My granddaughter is 17 now, and so that would make Sarah 20. And it just seems like it was yesterday. We became very, very close. These people went through quite an ordeal, and I just hope that Sarah has gotten on with her life. And, I know that I kept track of them for 2 years, and then after that, I mean, when you got 2 years going by, and then all of a sudden the nightmares start again. I was just making this worse on them. I finally, it was hard for me, but I had to break the connection.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's difficult. And I know a lot of people have difficulty with that. And I think you made the right decision, because a lot of times researchers will push their witnesses, and the witnesses are having a hard time dealing with things. And often when you're investigating a case, there's not much comfort that you can offer. You're trying to get information about what's going on, but that's not necessarily something that helps them. And so it was nice of you and wise of you to probably back off. Just unfortunately, you lose connection.
You lose connection. And, at first I would talk to her once a week. And then during the divorce, we'd talk sometimes 2-3 times a week. And then it got to be a month and then 2 months. And, when I talked to her a year later, and she says, "Oh, Sarah's doing fine." And then she would call me back and say her nightmares have started again. And then 6 months would go by. And, so it wasn't like I was calling her once a week for 2 years. But finally, the last time I had spoke with her had been, probably pretty close to 2 years. And after that, she called me and said she started having nightmares again. I thought, I can't do this. I just can't do this to these people. So, and she, at that point, too, was going to try. She was homeschooled 1 year, and she was going to try and put her back in school the winter semester. So she'd already been at least a year and a half that she had been homeschooled. And I don't know, their lives changed dramatically just in maybe a 20-30 minute span. What happened to them changed a marriage. I'm sure that they had problems before, but this was the deal breaker.
It would be so interesting to hear from her also, because of course, as a 20-year-old, she's going to be able to, no doubt she's put a lot of thought into what had happened, but she's going to be able to articulate herself so differently and probably see things so differently. So it would be fascinating to talk to her. Well,
you would think that, but I've had some other child witnesses before and run into them later, and they have no memory of any of this.
Oh, really?
Through the years, all of a sudden, it's gone. So I would like to talk to Sarah just to find out if she remembers me or any of this, but I would never press her for details, but because I would be afraid to start this again. But absolutely, it just surprised me that the younger children, they do. After a few years, the mom will say they don't remember anything at all.
That is fascinating. I wonder if it's pushing aside trauma or something else going on there. That's really it's fascinating. And one of the things it makes me think of is, like, a couple of years ago we had Emily Trim from the aerial encounter where those kids saw a craft land and a creature come out, they say. And then Martin Willis, who does this show podcast UFO, he had on another one of the aerial witnesses recently, and it's so fascinating to hear from them. But yeah, I had not ran into people who have just totally forgotten an encounter that has so affected their life.
Right. And that's why I am kind of curious to find out how she's doing. She's 20 years old. She may have, a child of her own now. She may be off in college. Really hard to say. She had a very good mom, very good dad. Just, sometimes people grow apart, and I think they grew apart, and just like my daughter did. My daughter and her daughter have moved on. So it's just that is something interesting. like to talk to Kathleen Martin, too, and find out if that's normal for children, that maybe they put the trauma aside, or maybe it's people that have been abducted and how their memories erased. Maybe eventually the memories just get hidden deep inside.
Very interesting stuff. Well, perfect timing because we're almost pretty much out of time, but these are great, great cases, and you've been doing this for a long time now. How long have you been state director out there in Missouri?
I've been investigating cases since, 2000. But I've been the state director since 2009. January of 2009, I took over.
Mm-hmm. So, 8 years now. And now you've also been on the board of the business board for MUFON, which is kind of the steering group. And you've been on the board for how long now? 2 or 3 years?
I don't remember.
Maybe even longer.
I think a little bit longer.
Time flies.
I know. When I came on the board, Clifford Clift was international director, and I'm not sure how long it's been. We've had Dave McDonald since then, and then now Tarzan. So it's been a little bit of a while.
Maybe
and then I've been
longer.
independent investigator, for maybe 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
I had a daughter that was an athlete, so I spent a lot of time, taking her to practice and stuff. And then when she moved on, I started my passion again.
Mm-hmm. So I guess a website where people can read more would be at the MUFON Missouri site?
MissouriMUFON.org. And if you want to read more about what Chuck and I have done, Chuck's website is UFO Nut.
Yep. Your brother's a UFO nut. Did you guys used to call him a UFO nut?
No, I'm UFO Spy.
Oh, yeah, that's right. UFO Spy. Uh-oh.
No.
Well, thank you.
I'm going to stop with that. We all had names.
Yeah.
We all had fun names for each other, but I'm going to stop with that. I love my brother.
Yeah, I think I've heard some of them. In fact, we were talking about some of the nicknames, which were pretty funny that you guys had for him. And I remember, I think there was one that you guys said you regretted because it was a little mean, but that's what little brothers are for, huh?
Well, let me put it this way. Chuck could make some great chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, right.
And unfortunately, we teased him, and he stopped making them. So
I know. Dang it. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show again, and we'll probably won't be too long till we have you back.
Oh, anytime. I enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Good luck on everything. Good luck on the movie.
Oh, thank you. And maybe they'll. I don't know.
We'll
Maybe
see.
They'll finally get their act together and get it out there for you.
Yeah,
for all
and then
of you.
there'll be Uma Thurman or Jenny McCarthy playing Debbie Ziegelmeyer.
There you go.
Thank you so much to Debbie for being on the show again. She is a lot of fun, not just to have on the show, but also to hang out with. She's such a hard worker, and I just can't say enough good things about Debbie. If you've met her or if you meet her, let's say at a MUFON symposium or something, you'll know exactly what I am talking about. She is not about herself. She's not ever self-promoting. She's all about doing good work and trying to find something out about the phenomenon. So thank you so much, Debbie, for being on the show. Remember, you can find more about her work at the Missouri MUFON site or at her brother's site, ufonut.com. He is a nut, too. Of course, you guys know that. He was on recently, and he's also a lot of fun. Anyway, thank you to Martin for doing the news for us. Of course, you can find him at Podcast UFO doing some really cool stuff over there. Hopefully he gets some power back or something or figures out how to do a show. I'm sure he will. He's always good at being creative and getting things working. Otherwise, of course, openminds.tv, you're going to see all of the news that Martin and I talked about. You're also going to see this week some stories by Robert Powell regarding that USS Nimitz case that we talked about with him last week, but we've got some stories going up on that. And of course, the UFO Congress, there's always new and cool stuff going up at the site and new speakers. Do please come to the conference. Really, really cool stuff. UFOcongress.com for more on that. I also want to thank Caleb Hanks for the opening and close music. I want to thank Systematics for the bumper music. And of course, I want to thank you, the listener. We'll talk to you all next week. Thank you all so much for listening. And until next time, adios, muchachos.
Your emotion